All right. So lastly, where does and you end the book on a hopeful note, and you give some suggestions as to how to move forward. But how do you, I guess, digest, metabolize Joe Biden as our savior in this instance? I mean, maybe it's slightly overstated, but I mean, as the guy that is at the very least, people are hoping will put an end at least to Trump, and then theoretically maybe open the door a tiny crack or something, or at least maybe make it, unlock the door, not necessarily open it. I mean, how do you?
I mean, because what the right calls Trump derangement syndrome, I fully have, and until that first step is taken care of, I can almost look no further. But in this book, I do, because it's a book and I have to look at the future. So I think Joe Biden, I think if the Democrats are elected, if Biden and Harris are elected, and if the Democrats take the U.S. Senate, that's a huge first step to beginning what needs doing. And Joe Biden, he, unlike some of the other people, I think, in these who are Democratic Party centrists, I think he's less, my sense is that he's less ideologically centrist than he is just, I don't know if that's practical. That he will move where his party has moved. And his party on these economic questions has moved, obviously, significantly to the left in the last decade. So, and what the Obama administration in 2009 decided, no, we can't go for public option healthcare because that's too radical, now is the Joe Biden position. So I am hopeful that he as just I don't want to say as just a Democrat who puts his finger to the wind and does what Democrats want, because that can be a bad thing. I think in this instance, it's kind of a good thing. So I'm hopeful. My first great disappointment would come when we see who he appoints to be Treasury Secretary and head of the Office of Management and Budget and all those jobs, and whether it's just more Wall Street guys. But I'm hopeful, and also a perverse thing that made me hopeful in the last 2 weeks is I went back and looked at Donald Trump's final big 2-minute campaign ad in 2016, and I swear to you, it's worth looking at. It could be a Bernie Sanders commercial. He does. It's from a speech he gave. Is the voiceover? It's all these scenes of Wall Street and bankers and Lloyd Blankfein and they have destroyed the working class in America and taken the wealth and given it. It's wild, right? And this is a guy who also campaigned on universal health care will be better than ever for you. People voted for him many people, for those reasons, thinking, he's not a Republican like those guys. Well, clearly that was his biggest lie of all. But my point in this conversation is that there is an audience a constituency for greater economic fairness and greater scrutiny of Wall Street and big business that isn't, just on the left. Obviously, that was part of the Bernie Sanders plan since, right, for the last 5 years of running for president. But I think there's some truth to it. And I think if where the Democrats are now is embodied by Joe Biden, and I think there's a fair shot of that happening, then, it's one good, important, small step in that direction.
Do you think people are going to stay engaged? I mean, one of the things that I remember after Bill Clinton got elected is that there was this sort of like collective sigh of relief that the Reagan era was over, including, George Herbert Walker Bush. Same on some level with Obama. Bush is done. Good. We can move on. And then that means that, I no longer have to look at the politics section of
100%,
whatever it is. And everybody, that centrist Democrat. And I would say in the book, I just want to make clear that people should know that you really you really recount the Democratic sort of buy into all this stuff. I didn't know that stuff about Gary Hart and Arthur Laffer. That really, it doesn't shock me knowing Hart's profile, but it sort of shocks me, that anybody would. And even after, what Laffer did in Kansas, we still have too much of Laffer is not mocked enough, I think. But do you think that people, and I'm talking in many respects, people, my generation, your generation, are going to just basically say, phew, no Donald Trump. Now I can go back and what's on HBO this week?
Sure. And I think we should also remember that is the way most Americans are about politics all the time. Even now, I talk to friends of mine who are political reporters who are out in the field talking to all kinds of people all the time, voters. And they always remind me, 60% or more of people just barely paid attention, and certainly until last week or this week haven't paid much attention. So yes, that is the default, is to return to that mean, which is why, the people who care are engaged, like the right, the economic right did in the 70s and 80s, got to have people on the left need to look at this and play a long game and keep at it. And the 10% or 20% or 30% or whatever who are engaged and care and aren't just going to be, oh my God, I don't have to think about Washington and the president anymore. And by the way, a lot of us who are engaged will also feel that a little bit. But I think, it needs to be a long game with clear principles that people keep pushing. Because one of the things I realized after I mostly finished this book was that it part of its purpose, perhaps, is a guidebook for what we can do now. And they had a lot of could do this more efficiently in lots of ways than the left could. They had corporations, and it was an easier for these guys to execute on a long game. But I think there's lots of lessons here, and people like AOC, I think, to my mind, she is every time I say that she's playing the long game. I feel like, and to hear her talk about, how we need to get ourselves ready for a fully automated AI future. She's playing in many different lanes at once, and she's not such a, she's a zealot who will never compromise in order to govern. She's already shown to me that she's not that, and she has compromised, and she's playing the game in a good way. So I until I am rendered entirely hopeless for the first time in my life, which could happen on November 4th or whenever we find out who won, I'm kind of hopeful.
Kurt Andersen, the book is Evil Geniuses, The Unmasking of America, A Recent History. Folks can check that out. We will post it to a majority at IFM. Thank you so much for your time.
It was a pleasure. This was a great conversation.
Well, thank you. All right. I appreciate it. All right, folks. I don't know why it took me so long. I should have. He should have been the first guest on the Majority Report with Janine and I. Maybe not necessarily the first, but very early, because turn of the century really captured the sort of craziness that was happening in New York City at that time.
Yeah, took a little bit of a different approach with him than you did with Stuart Stevens, didn't you?
I sort of I didn't hit him as hard as I hit Stuart Stevens. Hey, but Stuart Stevens says he wants to come back, so maybe next time, it'll be maybe next time we can. I don't know. I still have a couple of questions for Stuart Stevens. That, you get into the middle of it, and I got my papers here, and they get shuffled around, and I'm like, I got to hit this point. I got to hit that point. You don't want to come right out the gate and go after the guy. I know there was a lot of people I heard were like, I only listened for the first 4 minutes. I was so disgusted. I had to turn it off. And then I went back later, and, it got a little better. But but yeah, I got to admit, I'm a bigger fan of Kurt Andersen's than I am Stuart Stevens. I'm not saying I don't like Stuart Stevens. I just don't know him. So